Hello and welcome back to Tending the Tides. Over the past several months, we've been sharing all kinds of stories about mariculture on the Oregon coast. There is so much more to talk about and many more stories that we haven't shared here. So for our final episode, the full team is getting together to talk about what we learned, what we missed, and where we might go from here.
We'll also revisit some of our interviews and introduce some new voices you haven't heard from yet. But first, let's start by reintroducing the full podcast team.
I'm Megan, and I'm the Communications Director at Ecotrust.
I'm Emily Chen, Communications Manager at Ecotrust.
I'm Tyson Racer, and I'm the Director of Coastal Communities and Fisheries.
My name is Susie O'Neill, and I'm the Coastal Communities and Fisheries Coordinator.
I'm Caitlin Rich, and I'm the Director of Community Capital.
And I'm John Bonkoski, the Vice President of Coastal Communities and Fisheries at Ecotrust.
Thanks, everyone. It's really fun to be with you all and recapping the time that we've spent together on this project. We've been working on this project for over a year or about a year together, from kind of conception to now finishing up this final episode. I think the place that I'd like to start is just, how is everybody feeling?
I'm feeling actually pretty excited about where we are and what we've covered. I was excited about the idea of this project. I think I was the one initially pushing for it. And then Caitlin, I think you really jumped in and made stuff happen and started pushing us towards actual reality, which was really exciting. The evergreen aspect of the project, like that people are able to come back to this. You know, you have this sort of expectation, you put out a episode and people are just going to flock to it. And it's like, well, maybe not. But I'm hearing feedback on things that have come out a while back now. There's this cool thing that happens where people are catching up to it or hearing it on their own schedule and following up with us about it at different times. And I think we've sparked a really interesting way of approaching conversations around big topics like this. There's really, I think, an interesting format for approaching conversations that we'd like to have. And I'm excited about where we're going. I'd be interested to continue the project.
Yeah, I have a background in film, so I was really excited when you all wanted to make a podcast. I think it uses a different part of our brain, which makes this work really fun. Plus, it's just this great opportunity to be collaborating with you all. So yeah, it's been a joy, and I think I'm really proud of the work that we've done together to make a full season of a podcast, especially because we've started from the seed of the idea and all the work all the way through to releasing them.
It's a substantial amount of interviews and a substantial amount of number of people who took their time out of their day to show us what they're working on, talk to us, answer our questions. And even in all of those interviews and all of the perspectives and all of the ways that folks are working on the Oregon coast, there are still things in this podcast that we hadn't been able to dive into. And so I'm going to pair up these two questions, but what are some of the things that you all learned that are most exciting or interesting to you? And what's something that you learned about that we weren't able to dive into as much in the series?
One of the things that I thought was really interesting was just learning more about how mariculture replicates a lot of our ecosystems. So specifically, I'm just thinking about going out to the coast and seeing Uni's sea urchin ranch and how they walked us through like removing the urchins so the kelp can restore itself or regrow. And then they also are introducing sea cucumbers into their closed system because they're part of that cycle of eating the waste from the urchins, and then the sea cucumbers have waste and the kelp eats that, and it's all, that makes it sound very neat and tidy, but I think just in general, the systems that nature has, like, they work, and if we just pay attention, there's a lot of answers to the complex problems that we have.
For me, one of the unexpected surprises from diving into podcasting with you all was getting to speak with Xin Liu, the owner of Oregon Oyster Farms. He immigrated from Qingdao, China many years ago to attend Oregon State University and eventually acquired this 100-year-old oyster farm. I am second-generation Taiwanese American, and oysters are a major feature in Taiwanese cuisine. Taiwan, as an island, of course, has many of its own oyster farms, but one thing I learned from Liu is that here on this side of the Pacific, he can grow jumbo oysters that are 10 inches in size, which can't be produced in Taiwan because they have typhoons, which disrupt oyster growth. So he has a very specialized project that is extremely appealing to a seafood-based culture, and him being able to speak Mandarin Chinese, he's able to tap into that international market. I felt so pleasantly surprised to feel representation in this way among our interviewees, and I know there's a lot of folks and other coast-based, seafood-based cultures that we have yet to represent on this podcast.
I think the intention behind this was a little bit like, what's going on in Oregon? Like, why is it like this? You know, Oregon has potential for mariculture as a industry, but like, what's currently going on? What's shaping it? I would love to think now, like, okay, where do we go from here? We've sparked momentum around this in Oregon. Like, there's a lot of cool efforts coming together. There's the Oregon Ocean Cluster that's doing really interesting work around 100% utilization with fish and Oregon seafood. And the Oregon Coast Visitors Association has been doing some really great work. And I just think it'd be fun to continue these conversations and explore where we go from here, because I think in order to help make that happen, we got to keep building this connective tissue between these efforts.
Thinking about where do we go from here, we had a conversation with Dick Vanderschaaf, who we featured in one of our previous episodes about Olympia oysters. Dick is the Associate and Marine Conservation Director at the Nature Conservancy in Oregon. He shared some thoughts about ways that Oregon growers could cultivate additional native species beyond the Pacific oyster. There are fewer than 30 growers on the coast, but there is a desire to farm additional species like clams, mussels, and seaweeds. So one answer to what's next could be allowing growers to co-culture or grow these other species together. So let's take a minute and revisit that conversation we had with Dick.
I think the concept is that agencies would allow more experimental type of operations to test some of these concepts of growing other species in this watery environment. I think when we're working in natural environments such as bays and estuaries or near shore, we have to be cognizant of the fact that what we bring out there is going to be spread around by the currents, and so we have to have a little more control over what we are doing there. But it would be great if there would be some more allowance for testing of growing patterns of again, for native species. And so can we lease this space for 6 years and try these things? It's coming down to, can qualified operators work on some of these projects under a test situation that is easy to obtain, that experimental permit, if you will, and not such a high leap that they have to go through so many hoops, again with some controls, so we're not introducing non-natives into the environment that we can't control. I think that would be a worthwhile exercise.
Dick also shared that alongside this vision for experimental permits that would allow growers to test farming native species alongside Pacific oysters, the Native Conservancy is finalizing a spatial analysis tool. We'll link to it in the show notes. The spatial analysis tool can provide information about where on the Oregon coast is best suited to grow these other native species successfully.
The Nature Conservancy is actually working on developing what's called a spatial analysis to figure out where are some places where these different sorts of mariculture operations could occur. And we're looking both within estuaries as well as in the near shore, and we're looking both for native animal species such as the Olympia oysters as well as native seaweeds too. It's multifaceted. All of them should have or could have some aspects of lending towards restoring these habitats as well as we're looking at some operations that are basically going to be situated on docks. I mean, we already currently have a couple of operations in Oregon that are raising seaweed in tanks on docks, and one of them is also raising purple urchins too. I think there's opportunities to maybe raise some other seaweeds and species on docks too. So some of the work is trying to figure out where are opportunities to do this dockside work, where are there opportunities to raise organisms, both plants and animals, in the water and estuaries, and where are there places and opportunities in the nearshore environment. I think it's going to give a lot of people some information as to where they can maybe look to place these sorts of operations, and I think maybe give some inspiration to people that it is possible to expand and diversify the current kind of work, mariculture work that we have going on in Oregon.
If Oregon growers were able to test farming of more native species, the next step would be to bring that product to market. During our interviews last summer, we spoke with Sylvia, who is a marine resource economist and professor emeritus at Oregon State University. Gil agreed that testing sites could be a path forward, while also sharing his perspective on the economics of mariculture. So let's hear a little bit from that conversation too.
I don't think anyone can precisely predict a species that would be the most successful, because it's going to depend on the unique combination of location, technology, experience of the producer, and markets change all the time. So how you develop the market for that particular species. But the one species we had discussions about was scallops. And we said what we need is a kind of demonstration project that would look at the whole range of issues around trying to raise scallops, including the environmental impacts, including economics, including the technology, and get to support of a local community would support the project. So this idea of these test sites and plots makes a lot of sense if you were to break some of the barriers to aquaculture development that can exist in this state. Quite frankly, it just is a challenging industry. It can be really enjoyable, but it's not a highly profitable industry. You're going to be making, 2 to 5 or 10% of a year if you're very successful. But that takes a lot of experience. It takes time. It takes support. And any good aquaculturist has got to be a master at production as well as marketing. And they've got to be very good in getting through the regulatory process. They've got to have a wide range of skills.
Like Gil said, mariculture is a challenging industry, and it takes a lot of know-how to succeed. Aside from having more species, the right farm location, and the market, producers need the state of Oregon to invest in workforce development so the next generation can inherit a thriving coastal economy. So let me ask the team, what are your reflections and thoughts on workforce development needs?
Workforce development came up when we talked with Tom Calvanese from the Oregon Kelp Alliance about the work they're doing with tribal youth and training them to be divers. But I think there's so much more to get into around the topic of workforce because, like John mentioned in a previous episode, growing food in our oceans and restoring kelp forests and culling purple urchins, it's a lot of work and it's really hard work. And so a really important question is who is there to do the work and how can we train up the right people to do it? What are the right partnerships to make that happen with community colleges, tribes, universities, apprenticeships with farmers? So I think, that's an area that I'd love to explore further.
The Oregon coast does have a shortage of many things, and one of those things really that supports having a strong workforce is being able to have a place for those people to live. And there's a number of communities across the Oregon coast where that housing just isn't available. So that becomes a big challenge, no matter if it's in mariculture or if it's in another coastal ocean industry of any type. It's a shared challenge, and it's a bigger part of the puzzle to living on the coast and developing some of these thriving communities that we think about and want to be able to support. There's old infrastructure that's degrading, and there's not always a budget in a lot of these small communities to be able to fix those pieces of infrastructure. They can't bring in the taxes, or they have other monetary issues that they're working through to be able to fix things like their stormwater, their sewage, or in a lot of cases, it's also people's drinking water. It's aged infrastructure, and there's a lot of different ways that I think these connection points to developing a strong workforce show up. It's definitely a challenge.
As you pointed out, Tyson, building a strong workforce is about much more than training people for jobs. For that workforce to exist and thrive, people also need access to affordable childcare, stable housing, clean drinking water, and other essential services that support their daily lives. Looking ahead, my hope is that we can take a more holistic approach to workforce development on the coast. That means recognizing the broader systems that enable people to participate in the mariculture workforce and building partnerships across sectors to address those needs.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, there's not a silver bullet to the issues that we're facing, right? There's going to be a plethora of options or opportunities, and we should be exploring all of them. And really the point is that we need to be creating those enabling conditions that make it possible for us to explore these opportunities, right? So that's why we want to focus on building the network of people and kind of creating that connective tissue between who's working on the coast and who's working inland, and how we build that bridge between them.
To illustrate an example of developing connections between industries on the coast and inland, let's cut in here with another interview we did with Dr. Julianna Ranches, assistant professor and beef extension specialist at Oregon State University. She shared how her research is looking at the possibility of using Pacific dulse seaweed grown on the Oregon coast as a cattle feed that ranchers could use to reduce the methane emissions of cows.
So a year or two ago, we start looking into ways to mitigate methane emissions. And one of the ways we are familiar with is the use of seaweed for the reduction of methane. We want to explore other seaweeds, hence the Pacific seaweed, to see if we can figure out how to increase the bromoform concentration of those seaweeds, because that's exactly is what reduces the methane in cows, or the methane emissions, and changes the microbiome. This is a line of research that it's been out there for a while, I would say about 10 years already or more, but have so many questions to answer. And specifically one that really interests me is the multiple different seaweeds we can use. So most of the research at this point is using Asparagopsis, and we are particularly interested in Pacific dulse, simply because it grows here in Oregon. We are one of the largest producers in the U.S., so we want to join these two agricultural commodities, so cattle production with seaweed production, and work those together. I guess what really fascinates me or interests me most in this research specifically is that we can combine these two industries that are so far apart and at the same time can be so complementary. The methane problem with cattle and the emissions with cattle is not going to be one size fits all type of solution. So that's what I like too about the project, is that we're investigating multiple ways to address this problem.
So to summarize, there's a compound called bromoform present in some seaweeds. And bromoform is what disrupts the biological process that produces methane in a cow's digestive system. So far, most of the research around feeding seaweed to cattle has focused on a seaweed called Asparagopsis. But as Julianna mentioned, the team at Oregon State University is investigating whether Pacific dulse could offer a locally grown alternative. Throughout our interview with Julianna, she exemplified the learner's mindset. And this goes back to what the Oregon shellfish growers, Dick, Gil, and we ourselves have all been saying. Experimentation is so key to moving the mariculture sector forward. There are a lot of unknowns, but there's also an overwhelming interest in thoughtfully testing out new approaches.
So far in this episode, we've touched on several topics that we wish we'd had more time to explore throughout the series. Things like creating the enabling conditions for a mariculture workforce and finding new applications for mariculture products. But what voices do we feel are still missing from the series?
One thing that I really liked about how we approached the podcast is taking this really wide-ranging definition of mariculture, and I think a lot of times it can kind of be put into a box of just commercial production of farming food in the ocean or commercial applications like feeding seaweed to cows, but I think it's much broader than that, right? It can be restorative mariculture, it can be for enhancement of species, it could be for subsistence harvest, and so I really appreciated taking that wide lens, and that what I would love to have dove into further was hearing more directly from tribal voices and tribes on the Oregon coast around like all the work that's happening that like could be put into this sort of mariculture category of restoring different seaweed and shellfish populations and doing marine monitoring, maybe even doing clam gardening, or even like seeking commercial opportunities to do mariculture as a tribe.
We mentioned earlier about who does the work of mariculture, and it needs to be acknowledged that a lot of the seafood industry is sustained by the labor of folks from Central America and Southeast Asia, who often don't have the protections of citizenship or they have minimal workers' rights in the places where they're working. And industry conversations also tend to center white entrepreneurs, but there are a lot of folks outside of those identities who have connections to coastal foods.
I would love to talk to more people's grandmothers about the foods that they grew up eating and cooking. And I think that we would find a lot of overlap between what we define as mariculture on the coast and what those foods are. The reason that I like storytelling and business and the work we do at Ecotrust is because food is such a common denominator. Most of us have strong ties to the foods that we grew up eating and the foods that we like now, and there's often a story to those. We could do a whole podcast about that, and I would be so happy just eating and listening to folks tell us about the foods that they love.
You know, after all the stories and perspectives we've heard in this series, I'm feeling inspired about what lies ahead. So, team, in your eyes, where do we go from here? What is the work that's happening now to support mariculture in Oregon, and what are the steps we can take to make sure that work is successful into the future?
There's a lot of work that's been going on with the Oregon Coastal Mariculture Collaborative. And we've mentioned it before in the podcast, talking about the Futures Forum, which was a community event that happened back in November of last year. And now there's a continued Oregon Mariculture Network that's meeting quarterly to talk about mariculture, talk about what communities are interested in. And it's a place in this space where policymakers, growers, nonprofits, for-profits, interested individuals are showing up to be in conversation about this vision about what's happening on the coast. What are the things that we should be addressing? What do people want to see more of? And it'll be really interesting to see how these community conversations continue to drive forward. When we started our very first episode, you'll remember that Karina Nielsen was talking about the Oregon Way. And I feel like this is a long-term application to that. And as we continue to just have these conversations and open it up, I'm just really intrigued to think about wealth, community wealth, and what that means for the people that live here on the coast in Oregon and how that'll unfold. I think there's a tremendous opportunity to build power in a lot of different ways in a lot of different spaces through this work and through the engagement of it.
I'm actually thinking about the people that we've interviewed and worked with who are business owners, scientists and researchers, and community members. Because economies and markets are people, and we can't all do everything, and so we have an economy where we can exchange ideas and goods and services, and we can take care of one another if we move to a more reciprocal idea of what an economy and a market could be. We got into this in our previous episode on the currency of care, and I'm hopeful to see more excitement and experimentation around financial products like stewardship credits to support the work people on the coast are doing, including our own reparative loan fund here at Ecotrust, the Upwell Community Capital Fund.
John, I've heard you talk about an executive order in Oregon that could support some of this work we're talking about to advance the mariculture industry and develop a robust blue economy in Oregon. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, you're talking about Executive Order 2526 from Governor Kotek that came out last fall. I think one of the cool things about it is its opportunity to sort of align development of climate resilient industry with some of the regulatory barriers. So one thing that kind of has emerged as a possibility here is the ability to change gear type for a grower. This executive order might be a perfect way of leveraging that so that we could think differently about how we support growers in changing gear type without having to completely re-permit their whole farm. I think that's one of the things that we could do. And I think there's just a number of ways we could use that executive order to help us work with state agencies to achieve better outcomes around more resilient activities on the coast and elsewhere. I think that's an important strategy to think about. Also, the legislature and the governor just signed a Blue Economy Task Force bill that's going to establish a new task force over the next year. I think that's another great place to support and build out some more strategies around building a blue economy in Oregon and what that looks like.
From the Oregon Mariculture Network to stewardship credits to the Blue Economy Task Force and all of the inspiring work we have learned about over the duration of our podcast, it feels like there's so much energy and momentum around mariculture and opportunity for coastal economies in Oregon. So to close us out, I want to hear where you all hope these efforts will lead. What is your 10-year vision for mariculture and the Oregon coast?
A decade's not that far out, but I would love to see a community of growers, researchers, nonprofits, local representatives, elected officials in greater community with each other and greater knowledge of what's happening on the coast and thinking about how mariculture is a part of the larger ecosystem that can help provide a healthy place for our communities to live across all these different forms of wealth of culture and environment and economy and kind of this larger thought around wealth, and starting to work together and understanding what those things are and have a little bit more of a shared vision about what that can look like and how it could function and how different pieces of infrastructure are playing into it. And even thinking about like in 10 years out, could we have resources that we're using to grow these critters that are more environmentally friendly? Can we move into things like biodegradable baskets for holding our oysters or biodegradable ropes and other resources? There's already some really great work that's happening on that front and people exploring it. And so continuing to grow those options and make them more affordable and more accessible would be a really exciting addition to driving innovation on the coast and what we're doing there.
Along the lines of what Tyson's saying is like that we've in 10 years created and supported and extended the enabling conditions for a larger, more thriving health and wealth on the Oregon coast that also comes inland, and we see that. And so we've reversed the trend or are reversing the trend on the local seafood issue, and we're addressing the multitude of issues around housing and childcare and healthcare so that there's a steady workforce that feels supported. I'd love to see us have pretty major progress on that.
I hope that anyone can go to the Oregon coast and just go to any restaurant and eat delicious local seafood. I think that would be amazing, both selfishly for myself, but also I think it would have a huge impact on all of the folks living on the coast doing the work that we were just talking about. And I think it also, one of the things that's really fun, at least for me, when I go eat local seafood is you can usually see how it's grown. And so it'd be really awesome if there was more of a culture of community mariculture gardens. So you could like pop by and see how the food is grown, and maybe that would tie into the workforce development training we're talking about, as well as like the co-culturing of all of these different shellfish and seaweeds together. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that all of these projects are not just invested in by consumers or folks who are coming there to eat, but also that our pilot stewardship credit has taken off, and that it's not just Ecotrust or Salmon Returns doing this work, but cities have adopted this, and there's this just different notion of what it means to invest in something. It doesn't mean you get money back. It means you get the healthy community that you live in and the beautiful environment and the good food and all those things.
Here's my vision. That watershed stewardship extends from the ridgeline to the coastline, looking out on this 10-year horizon, that tribal co-management, where they are actively invested in siting of new locations, where we're looking at the entire watershed, where the health of the forest is influencing the health of estuaries and bays, is considered and in the midst of this whole ecosystem planning. And when you paddle a boat or fish from the shore of a bay or estuary. The water is clean and well managed, and the fish or shellfish and other things that you might harvest with your family, you know that they're safe to eat. Then the other part of this vision is that people who visit the coast understand that when they come to visit the coast, they're coming to people's homes. They have an active role and can play an active part in making sure that these communities are well cared for, that they can play a part in investing in these communities in different ways, that people who live and work on the coast are stewarding environments that are helping all of us live better in the region, and that visitors have regular and kind of joyful experiences of understanding that, learning about it. So there's like a real sense that not only is the Oregon coast the people's coast, it's like the full realization or the full expression of what that means to be the people's coast.
To learn more about the mariculture spatial analysis from the Nature Conservancy, check out the link in the show notes. We'd also like to give a special thank you to the Oregon Coastal Mariculture Collaborative, a collaborative of Oregon-based organizations brought together by a shared focus on restorative mariculture on the Oregon coast. Without the support, expertise, thoughtful discussions, and interviews with collaborative members, this podcast would look very different, so thank you.
This episode featured interviews from Dick Vanderschaaf, Gil Sylvia, and Dr. Julianna Ranches. Written by Tyson Razor, Megan Fouch, Caitlin Rich, and Susie O'Neill. Edited by Emily Chen. Produced by John Bonkowski and Emily Chen. Music by Imagine Nostalgia, Boxwood Orchestra, and Our Many Stars. Illustrations by Tony Sterling, and design by Eldai de la Cruz.
This podcast was made possible by our funders at the Builders Vision Philanthropy. Builders Vision invests in and collaborates with nonprofits, businesses, and others working towards sustainable solutions to societal and environmental challenges. This podcast is a production from Ecotrust, where we work in partnership at the intersection of equity, economy, and environment. Learn more at ecotrust.org.
If you'd like to engage with us, visit the Oregon Coastal Mariculture Collaborative website and consider joining the Oregon Mariculture Network. We've provided links to both of those in the show notes. Thank you for listening to this first season, and until next time, keep on tending the tides.